Welcome to lesson 2-3, use models to add and subtract decimals. Our I can statement says, I can model sums and differences of decimals. Please write these in your math journal, and then let's go on to the next slide. There are no vocabulary terms for this one because we've already done them earlier in the topic. Okay, so before we start looking at our problem, we need to remember cubes so we understand what we're trying to figure out. So I always write this up there to remind me of those steps. Okay, we need to go through and circle the important numbers. 75 hundredths and 1 and 40 hundredths. I know that doesn't want to circle very well again. Those are the important numbers that we need to identify. We need to underline the question we're answering. How many miles did Gloria ride in all? Okay, so Gloria rode her bicycle 7,500 mile in the morning and 1 and 40 mile in the afternoon. And then we need to kind of evaluate and visualize how we're going to solve this. Well, this says that we can solve this problem any way we choose. So when you pause this, I just want to solve it. How many miles did Gloria ride in all? Once you have your solution down in your journal, you can go ahead and press play again to kind of see how I solved the problem and some other possible strategies. Okay, so let's take a look at our solution to this problem. Now, many of you might have just chosen to solve this by adding up 75 hundredths and 1 and 40 hundredths miles. And that is absolutely a correct strategy. But the topic for this lesson is use models to add and subtract decimals. So the most efficient strategy for most of you, you know at this point, if we add, subtract, compare decimals, we always just have to line them up by their decimal points. So I'm going to go ahead and do that math, but then I'm going to show you how we could use models to actually represent this problem. So you might have done something like this to begin with, 75 hundredths and 1 and 40 hundredths. When we add that up, we're going to get 2 and 15 hundredths miles. Okay? That is an accurate answer to this question. But there might be times on quizzes, on tests, on the map test, where they might give you this problem, but they might not show you the answer with a number answer like what we got. They might show it to you as a visual representation. So I'm going to go through a way that you could, a possible way you could see it, and then a couple other solutions that you could see this answer in a different way. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of some of this writing so I have a little bit of room to work here. All right. So the way I'm going to show you, just because I need to think of a way I can visually show this to you without drawing a whole bunch of decimal grids that all have 100 little cubes in them. I don't think I can do that on this. So I'm going to show you another way. I'm going to draw really kind of a 3-column little chart here. And this column I am going to call the ones column. Right here I'm going to put a decimal point. I'm going to make that a little bit better. This is going to be my tenths column. And this is going to be my hundredths column. I know the answer to this problem is 2 and 15 hundredths miles. I'm going to show you what that might look like in a column chart like this. Okay, we have 2 in the ones column. I'm going to draw 2 boxes, and these are going to represent decimal grids that are divided into 100 little pieces. I can't draw 100 little squares in there, but we're just going to say that that's what they represent. So I have 2 in my ones column. Tenths are usually going to be represented as just one column within that box. So I'm just going to draw it as a straight line. That's representing 10 little boxes out of here, but I'm just writing it as a column. So that's representing my 1 in the tens column. And then I'm going to do, they're going to look like dots, but they're going to be 5 little squares. And that's going to represent my 500ths. So this is one way that you could visually represent a decimal number by drawing a chart like this. Let me show you a couple other pieces of student work where you can see some other ways that they're visually represented. Okay, this is Martina's work. And Martina had some decimal grids that she could just color in, which makes this a lot easier. All right. I want to explain what the different colors mean though. Okay, in that original problem, we have to add together 75 hundredths and looks like a decimal instead of a plus, 1 and 40 hundredths. If we count the green squares and we counted all of them up, it would be 75 hundredths, or 75 of the little pieces that this one whole is divided into. And we could do that by counting the columns, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Each of those has 10 in it. So that's 70 hundredths, and then 5 more. So that's where we get our 75 hundredths. It's the green squares. Now, if we look at the 1 and 40 hundredths, that's represented with the blue dots. So we have one whole that is represented here by this middle square that's all filled in, this decimals chart. And then if we count our tenths over here, we're going to have 1, 2, 3. We have 5 and another 5. So that's going to give us, if we add all of those up, that's going to be 40 hundredths. So it's represented, all of it's represented by the blue, which is 1 and 40 hundredths. So if we add all of those squares up, we're going to get 215 hundredths. So that means there's 215 total little squares shaded in. Or if we change that into ones, tenths, and hundredths, that's 2 and 15 hundredths miles. Now we could get that answer very simply by adding those two together by lining up our decimal points. We got 2 and 15 hundredths, but this is a way that it could be visually represented. Okay, let's look at our next example. This is Frank's work. Now Frank's work, because it doesn't kind of have a math problem or say what his thinking was, is a little bit more complex to figure out, but I'm going to break it apart for you. So we know our answer was 2 and 15 hundredths. Okay. We have 5 little squares over here. That's the same thing as the 5 little dots that we did. Okay. All right. We're going to count these lines. They each represent a column or a row of 10. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If we put those 10 rows of 10s together, we'd get one whole. Okay, so that's where one of our, out of our 2 whole is coming from. And then this other square here represents the other box, kind of like we wrote in ours. So we have 1 is represented right here. The other one is represented here. So that's where we get our 2. We have 1/10 represented here in that one line. That's where we get our 1 for right here. And then over here we have 5 individual hundredths of those little squares. So that's where we get our 5. So Frank drew this out correctly. It's just kind of out of order, so you kind of have to look at it closely. What Frank didn't do was he didn't write out the problem to kind of explain what this work meant. So when you write out your summary of your thinking, if you solve this by lining up the decimal points and adding the 2 decimal numbers together to get an accurate answer, that's a very efficient way to solve this problem. And that's an appropriate way to summarize how to do this work. We just have to remember that sometimes decimals are going to be represented with visuals instead of numbers. And we just have to be able to figure out what those visual representations mean or what decimal number they're representing. Please summarize your thinking, and tomorrow we'll discuss this a little bit further in class.